Previously, on part 2 of our White Mountains special. After finally making it into the White Mountains, I spent the day exploring the area south of Big Lake. From the top of Big Lake Knoll at over 9,400 feet, I was treated to an incredible 360-degree view of the surrounding forest. After taking some rougher and narrower forest trails, I made it past the west fork of the Black River and through some scenic meadows. I camped out along the banks of the West Fork, which proved to be one of the best nights of camping I ever had. Today, I continue with day 3 of my trip, continuing south on difficult trails to the historic PS Knoll lookout, and dealing with some vehicle issues later in the day. After a restful night of camping along the serene West Fork, I left camp late in the morning as I headed back south to Forest Road 25. I turned right and continued west on the wide and mostly smooth road. My plan was to follow this for roughly 20 miles to the south end of the road near Hannigan Meadow. After a couple miles, I detoured off the main road and continued south. Before heading on the rest of the drive, I wanted to try and find an old fire tower that's in the area. The lookout was a little out of the way, but figured I had the time to do a little exploring. Plus, these trails were a little bit rougher, so it would add a little fun to the day as well. The trail meandered southeast as it passed through some sparse forest and beautiful meadows. It was really quite scenic, and there was no other traffic so far. After around a mile, I stayed left onto Forest Road 555 and continued uphill towards the lookout. The trail quickly got rougher. The surface was rocky and had seen some erosion. I kept the Jeep in 4 high as the road twisted and climbed. Things got quite steep and a little tippy. This was by far the roughest trail I had been on so far. Eventually, the trail led up as it crested the hill and arrived at the top. Not only did I find a lookout tower, but there was also a cabin and a few other structures, which was a pleasant surprise. I parked the Jeep and hopped out on foot. This fire tower is called PS Knoll Lookout. It was built in 1933 and features a 50-foot tall aeromotor tower with a 7x7-foot platform at the top. The tower looked to be in incredible shape. It didn't seem like anyone was on duty, so I decided to climb up the tower. After several flights of stairs, I made it to the base of the tower. Unfortunately, a locked door at the top kept me from going all the way up. Nevertheless, the view from up here was pretty incredible. Located at just over 8,000 feet, this lookout offers another commanding view of the remote stretch of forest. Back on the ground, I walked around the outside of the old cabin. It was also locked, although the door looked like it had been vandalized. The inside was pretty bare and dusty. The property also had an outhouse and some kind of shed out back. It was really quite an impressive setup. It is unclear if the lookout is still staffed today, although since everything appeared to be in decent shape, it could be used on an as-needed basis. I returned to the Jeep and started back downhill. I carefully picked my line on the way back down. Halfway down from the lookout, I couldn't help but notice an unusual sound coming from outside of my Jeep. Every so often, I would hear a psst sound. After further investigation, I discovered that my left front had developed some kind of leak. At this point, I couldn't tell how bad it was, but the tire still appeared inflated, at least for now. I bombed my way back downhill, trying to get closer to Forest Road 25. Speed did not help, as the more the tire rotated, the more air it seemed to lose. Just a couple of miles later, I pulled into a clearing to assess the damage. It didn't look too good. I checked the pressure and it had dropped to a whopping 4 pounds. I had been aired down since yesterday afternoon, but that was only down to about 15 to 18 pounds. I could have changed the tire right here and now, and I probably should have, but I figured I would air it back up and see if it would hold for a little while. I wanted to at least get further down the trail and hopefully to my intended campsite. That way I could leisurely change the tire and set up camp in the same spot. My plans to do the loop down along the Forest Road 25 would unfortunately have to be scratched. My intended campsite wasn't too far to the east, but I wanted to get as close as I could. I aired the tire back up to 20 pounds and it seemed to be holding air. As I got rolling back to Forest Road 25, I checked the tire and it still looked alright. I continued to the east, but it soon became clear that this wasn't going to work. Every time the tire spun, it let out some air. I was forced to air up again on the side of the road as the tire had dipped back down to around 5 pounds. And this game continued over the next few miles. I'd air the tire up, then continue down the trail for roughly a mile and a half, and then it'd be flat again. It happened again, and again, and eventually I got tired of it. So the tire situation was a little bit worse than I thought, and I'm actually pulled over here. I'm going to have to change it right now. I was able to get maybe a mile to a mile and a half each time I aired up. It was just every time that wheel spins, psst, 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 it's just letting air out, and the faster I went, the more it let air out, so there was no way I could make it last for any longer, and frankly I got tired of airing up about 3 or 4 times. So I'm pulled over here in a kind of a nice shady spot off the main road. Gonna have to pull out all our gear, which should be fun because it's buried underneath the cooler and camera gear, but I'm gonna get to that, and hopefully we can get this tire changed quick. This is my first official kind of like out on a trip tire change, so should be fun. Parked in a nice shady spot off the busy road, I got to work on changing the tire. The first order of business was getting to my tools, which of course were buried underneath the rear seats. Next up, I had to free my spare tire. It turns out the socket that I bought specifically for changing tires didn't actually fit the lugs on the spare. Luckily, the factory lug wrench, which I still had underneath the seat, fit the spare tire. Otherwise, I would have been screwed. Definitely a little bit of oversight on my part. With the Jeep still on the ground, I loosened the front lug nuts before chalking the rear tires and getting the jack in place. Using some wood supports, I was able to raise the Jeep up and loosen up the flat tire. From the clean spot it made on the tire, you can see roughly where my leak was coming from, which seemed like it was right where the sidewall meets the tread. With the old tire off, I put my spare on. I put on the lug nuts and snugged them up. I also needed my locking lug key. I knew I left it around here somewhere. Ah, there it is. Don't want to lose that. I lowered the Jeep back down to the ground and gave everything a final tighten. Lastly, I aired the new tire back down to trail pressure and I was ready to go. All in all, the whole process took around 30 minutes, which isn't too bad considering I had to shuffle a bunch of gear and get the right tools in place. It was now around 3:30. There was still a decent amount of daylight left, so I wanted to do some more exploring, but with no spare left, I would have to take it a bit easier. Continuing east, I soon reached Buffalo Crossing, where Forest Road 25 meets 24 at the East Fork of the Black River. Heading south from there, the views opened up in a wide meadow. The trails remain smooth. Five miles south, the road climbed sharply. Things got narrower and entered into some of the worst parts of the Wall of Fire burn area. The Wall of Fire was caused by two campers and burned out of control for over a month back in 2011. In all, over 530,000 acres or 800 square miles were burned. This part here saw some of the worst damage and won't fully recover for many decades. It was really crazy to see how much the fire burned. I turned around at this point and set out to find a campsite. The road was fun to drive and even had a little bit of water in some spots. The campsite I had planned on originally staying at had already been claimed by some other people. I did manage to find an incredible view of the Black River though. This section was exceptionally rocky with steep ledges along the river banks. After retracing some of my route from earlier, I eventually settled on a nice forest camp spot not far from where I changed my tire. It was now 6 o'clock and I worked on getting camp set up. I played with the tent annex a little bit, but after a while, came to the conclusion that it's too much of a hassle and adds too much time to the setup and tear down time. Dinner tonight was going to be super quick. I was tired from the day, which had turned out quite differently than planned. It was grilled cheese and beer, and it was delicious. After watching the sunset, it was off to bed. Coyotes off in the distance serenaded me right to sleep. The next morning at around 8, I was awake and refreshed. I got some quick breakfast going, which was going to be oatmeal and of course coffee. The night had been pretty cool, but fortunately a little bit warmer than the previous night. I took a quick walk over to a nearby corral. The corral was pretty dilapidated and overgrown, but was quite extensive. At some point in the past, a bunch of animals were stored in the different pens. Some kind of old trailer remained near the loading station. After this, I packed up camp and got ready to hit the trail once again. I returned to the trail junction at Buffalo Crossing. From here, I picked up Forest Road 276. This trail follows along the East Fork of the Black River. It has numerous campgrounds and lots of traffic, so don't expect to find any solitude along this section. But the views are something else. The road meandered uphill through a narrow canyon, and at certain points, I was driving just feet away from the flowing river. At one of the many campgrounds, I took the opportunity to top off my water tanks before continuing on. There are a few spots where you can get free water, but most of the campgrounds do charge a fee. Past the river, the road climbs out of the canyon and traverses some rather thick forest. "13 miles from Buffalo Crossing, I made it to a paved road. From here, you have the option of staying right to get to the town of Alpine, or staying left to get back to Big Lake. I'd be going left, but only for about half a mile, since my next trail was just up to my north. Because this was only a short pavement stretch, I wouldn't need to air up. Almost as quickly as I was on pavement, I was soon turning back onto the dirt road for another couple days of exploring. Tune in next week to the fourth and final episode of our White Mountain special. The scenery gets even better, if that's possible, as I explore the area east of Big Lake. An old homestead, a view straight out of a postcard, and a couple more great campsites on my final 2 days in the White Mountains.